7 nannies. That was how many Valdres Keep had gone through in 11 months. 7 trained, experienced, highly recommended she-wolves, each one vetted by the council, approved by the Alpha King's household staff, given every resource the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories could offer. 7 women who had looked at 2 4-year-old boys and decided, within weeks, that no amount of coin was worth it. The twins were not violent. They were not cruel. They were not even particularly disobedient in the way that the official reports described. They did not scream. They did not throw things. They did not behave in any of the ways that nanny dismissal reports usually cited. They simply knew things they should not know. The second nanny left after waking at midnight to find both boys sitting at the foot of her bed, watching her sleep, having unlocked a door with a key that had not yet been cut. The fourth left after Cale told her, during a routine afternoon lesson, that her husband in the Western Territory was unhappy and had been for 3 years, and that she already knew this but kept not looking at it. He was 4 years old. He was right. The fifth left after Dran drew a map of the Eastern Territories from memory, including 3 border changes that had been classified at the highest level of the Alpha King's Council and which no child had any possible means of knowing. The sixth left after both boys sat at the breakfast table and said, simultaneously, without looking at each other, "She's going to leave before noon." She left before noon. 7 nannies. And then the council sent Wren. If you have ever been underestimated so completely that the world gave you the exact job that let you prove everyone wrong, this story is going to stay with you. Like the video, hit that subscribe button right now, and drop in the comments where you are watching from. Someone is watching from your country right now. Let's get into it. Her name was Wren Adley. She was 23 years old, an Omega from a small pack called Crestfall on the western edge of the Northern Territories, and she had been rejected by her mate Bond, formally, publicly, and in front of her entire pack, 11 months ago. The rejection had not broken her. It had done something else. She would spend a long time trying to find the right word for what it had done, and the closest she ever came was clarified. Like water that has been turbulent for a long time, suddenly going still, and in the stillness you could see the bottom clearly for the first time. She had been 22 when the bond snapped into place between her and Wren Adley, the first son of Crestfall's Beta, a wolf of considerable social standing and considerably less moral courage, who had looked at his mate Bond to an Omega and made the calculation that most wolves in his position would call practical. He had rejected her in the pack square. She did not want you to think he was a monster. She had been very careful, in the 11 months since, not to make him a monster in the version of the story she told herself. Monsters were easy. Wren was not easy. He was a man who had a particular life he wanted and who understood, clearly and immediately, that accepting his bond to Wren would make that life harder. He had made a choice. The choice was wrong. It was not monstrous. It was ordinary, which was in some ways worse, because ordinary wrong choices were the ones the world did not hold people accountable for. He had used the formal rejection words, the old words that severed a bond that hadn't even been given the chance to settle. The words that pack law allowed, but that the old traditions described as the worst thing one wolf could do to another short of physical harm, because they used the bond's own mechanism against itself, took the specific biological recognition of the wolf's deepest instinct and forced it to reverse. She had felt it happen. It felt like a door slamming in a room where you had been standing and now were standing outside of, in the cold, and the room was still warm, and you could see the warmth through the window, and the door was locked from the inside. She had stood in the pack square and felt it happen, and she had not cried. She had stood very still, in the way she stood still when things were happening that she needed to understand before she responded to them. She had looked at Wren Adley. His expression was the composed expression of a man who had rehearsed this and was prepared to manage whatever scene came next. She had given him nothing to manage. She had turned around and walked home. She did not leave Crestfall immediately. That would have been fleeing, and she was not fleeing. She stayed 3 more weeks, long enough to settle her accounts, inform the people who needed to be informed, arrange her mother's care with the neighbor who had always been willing to help, and accept the placement offer that had come through the regional Omega support network 2 days after the rejection. The network was a practical thing, a quiet infrastructure that existed because rejected Omegas were a recurring feature of wolf society, and the network was run by people who had decided that the appropriate response to recurring practical problems was to build practical solutions, not to wait for the problem to stop recurring. The placement offer was for a position at Valdres Keep, a childcare position, specifically. Twin boys, 4 years old, 7th position this year. Previous candidates did not stay. She had read the placement description with the specific attention she gave to things that other people found alarming, which was the same attention she gave to everything. She had said yes. She arrived at Valdres Keep on a Tuesday in October with a single bag and a very clear understanding that the 7 women who had preceded her had not failed because they were bad at their work. They had failed because they were frightened. She was not frightened of unusual children. She was not frightened of much anymore. The rejection had clarified that too. The Keep's housemaster, a meticulous woman named Orvie, met her at the gate with the expression of a person who had been managing a difficult operational problem for 11 months and had stopped expecting good news. She looked Wren up and down once. Wren could see exactly what Orvie was calculating. Omega, young, alone, slight build, no particular marks of distinction or impressive bloodline visible on her person. She let Orvie calculate. The previous 7 positions ended within 6 weeks each, Orvie said, covering what she clearly considered the most important ground first. The boys are unusual. I want you to be prepared for that. What kind of unusual? Wren asked. They know things. Things they shouldn't be able to know. They speak accurately about private matters, classified information, the thoughts and feelings of people around them. We don't have an explanation for it. She paused. It's unnerving. How old are they? 4. 4.5, now. Wren nodded. And their father? She asked. Orvie's expression shifted in a way that contained several things. The Alpha King has been managing the Council's response to the Eastern Territorial dispute for the past 3 months. He is present, but the boy's situation is a significant source of stress. He has been unable to find them consistent care, and the Council is. She stopped. There are Council members who believe the boy's abilities are dangerous, that they represent some kind of, she chose her words carefully, anomaly. What does the Alpha King believe? He believes his sons are remarkable and that the Council can mind its own business, Orvie said, with the specific precision of someone quoting something they had been told to soft pedal but were done soft pedaling. Wren almost smiled. Can I meet them now? She asked. The boys were in the garden, not playing, not in the conventional sense of children engaged in the joyful, undirected activity of play. They were sitting on opposite ends of a stone bench, facing away from each other, each apparently doing nothing. They were 4 years old, and they had the specific stillness of beings who had been still for a long time and had no particular intention of changing. Wren stood at the garden gate for a moment and watched them. She did not announce herself. She did not make the cheerful introductory sounds that she had heard adults make to young children, the careful performance of approachable friendliness designed to make children comfortable with an arrival. She just stood there. After approximately 30 seconds, the boy on the left turned his head. Kale. She knew because of the slightly different set of his chin from the placement description photograph. One of the very few practical differentiating details she had managed to extract from the documentation, which had otherwise contained far more information about the previous nanny's distress than about the boys themselves. Kale looked at her. Dark eyes. The specific quality of attention in them that she had been told about. Not the attention of an observant child, but something more like the attention of something very old that happened to be in a child's body. Direct and waiting and entirely unbothered by the fact that she was a stranger at the gate. Then the other one turned. Dran. Same eyes. Same quality of attention. The slight difference she had been looking for, something around the mouth, a fractionally different quality of stillness, a way of holding himself that was marginally less forward than his brother. They both looked at her. She looked back. You're not scared, Cale said. No, she said. Everyone else was scared, Dran said. By the second week usually. I know, she said. I read the reports. A pause. Why aren't you scared? Cale asked. She thought about answering diplomatically. About giving them the version designed to be reassuring. The one that said I'm very experienced with unusual situations, or I had training for this kind of placement, or any of a dozen things that were not quite lies, but were not the whole truth either. She gave them the whole truth. Because the things that other people found frightening about you, knowing things, saying accurate things about what people were feeling, those aren't frightening things to me. They're just ways of being in the world that most people haven't encountered before. Cale was quiet for a moment. She meant it, he said, to his brother rather than to her. I know, Dran said. That's different, Cale said. Then, in unison, with the specific quality of two beings who had been waiting for something and had just found it. Come in, they said. She opened the gate. The first 3 days were unlike anything that had been described in the placement reports. Because what the placement reports had carefully described was what happened when frightened adults met the boys. The specific way that fear, even managed, professional, well-intentioned fear, altered a person's behavior in ways that the boys could see and respond to. They had not been difficult. They had been mirrors. They reflected back what was brought to them, with the accuracy of very old glass. And what 7 nannies had been unable to handle was seeing themselves clearly in the reflection of 2 4-year-olds who had not yet learned the social skill of pretending not to notice the truth. With Wren, there was nothing to reflect. She had already looked at herself clearly. The rejection had seen to that. So the first 3 days were simply 2 unusual boys getting to know a new person, and a new person getting to know 2 unusual boys, in the ordinary way of people who had no ulterior motives and no performance requirements. She learned them quickly. Cale was the one who led. Not dominantly. Not with the pushy authority of an eldest child establishing territory, but in the particular way of someone who naturally organized the direction of things. He was the one who said, let's go to the Eastern Garden, and Dran went. And Cale was the one who decided, on the second day, that Wren could see the library. We're not supposed to be in the library alone, Dran told her, with the specific precision of a child who knew rules thoroughly enough to parse their exact limits. We wouldn't be alone, Cale said. She'd be with us. Wren had looked at the library rule from 3 angles and determined that bringing an adult removed the specific concern the rule was addressing, which was the boys being unsupervised near the historical document collection. That works, she said. The library was where she discovered what nobody in the placement reports had thought to mention. The boys could read. Not haltingly. Not with the labored sounding out of very young children encountering text. Cale had pulled a governance document from the second shelf and read her 3 paragraphs aloud, fluently, with the comprehension of someone who understood what they were reading rather than simply decoding it. She had watched this happen. Then she had said, very calmly, "Do you do this often?" "When we're allowed in," Dran said. "Which used to be more. Before the new rules." "Who made the new rules?" "Father's Council," Cale said. "Advisor Wendell thinks we shouldn't be reading things like that." Wren had looked at the document, a governance report on Eastern Boundary water rights, and then at Cale, who had just read it fluently at age 4.5. "What do you think about the water rights question?" she asked. He had looked at her. "The 3rd clause is going to cause problems," he said. She stared at him. She had heard that exact analysis before. It was not from any source that should be accessible to a 4-year-old. "Where did you hear that?" she asked. Cale frowned slightly. "I didn't hear it. I read the document. It says," he pointed to a specific section, "this provision doesn't account for the seasonal variation in runoff. If there's a dry year, Both parties will claim priority, and there's no resolution mechanism. It's going to be a problem. She looked at the provision. He was completely correct. She looked back at him. Good analysis, she said, and meant it. He blinked. Then, in a voice that was very small for a boy who had been reading governance documents, no one has said that before. About something we said. She looked at both of them. At the two dark-eyed boys sitting in the library of the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories, who knew things that adults spent careers learning, who had been driving away every person assigned to care for them, who were sitting very still in the specific way of children who had learned that the things they noticed scared the people around them. Well, she said, they should have. The Alpha King appeared on day 4. She had been aware of him in the ambient way of the keep, the specific organizational shift that happened in a building when its most significant inhabitant was moving through it, the altered posture of the staff, the cleared corridors. She had tracked the patterns without intending to, the way she tracked most things, as background information. She had not expected him in the schoolroom. She was in the middle of a lesson, not a formal lesson, nothing like what the previous nannies had apparently attempted with their careful curricula. She had simply sat down with both boys and said, "What do you want to know about?" And they had looked at her with the frank, assessing eyes and said, "Water." So they were talking about water, about the hydrological cycle, about how rain became rivers, became sea, became cloud, about what made some water safe and some water dangerous, about the specific question of the Eastern water rights dispute that Cale had identified from the governance document, because apparently that was the level at which the conversation had arrived. The Alpha King walked in. He stopped. He was tall in the way that alpha wolves were tall, with the specific economy of movement of someone who had been in the rooms he occupied for long enough to move through them without thinking about it. His hair was dark, and he had the kind of face that had been worn into a particular shape by a particular life, specific and real in a way that formal portraits never quite captured. He looked at his sons. His sons looked at him. Then both boys looked at Wren. "This is Wren," Cale said, with the specific tone of a child making an introduction that he considered important. "She knows about water rights." The Alpha King looked at Wren. She met his eyes. Something happened that she was not prepared for. Not the bond. The bond was broken. The rejection had severed it with the formal words, and she had felt it go, and she was not capable of a bond in the technical wolf sense anymore. Would not be for at least a year by the old medicine's reckoning, and sometimes not ever if the break was deep enough. Not the bond, but something that was in the same neighborhood as the bond. Something that lived in the same part of the animal self that the bond lived in. Something that recognized another person with a specific quality of recognition that went below surface assessment. She looked at the Alpha King of 5 packs and felt, for the first time since the rejection, the door that had been slammed become fractionally less cold. She did not let herself think about that yet. "Wren Adley," she said. "I started Monday." He looked at her for another moment. "They're talking about water rights," he said, confirming, not questioning. "Cale read the 3rd quarter governance report," she said. "He had a comment about Clause 7. It was accurate." The Alpha King looked at his son. Cale looked back. "She agreed with me," Cale said. Something moved through the Alpha King's face. Something that had been tight for a long time and had just, slightly, not quite loosened but shifted. "Can I sit in?" he asked. Both boys looked at each other. Then at Wren. "It's your house," she said. "Still," he said. "Yes," Dran said. "You can sit in." He sat down. Wren continued the lesson. And the Alpha King of 5 packs sat in the schoolroom of his own compound and listened to an Omega and his 4-year-old sons discuss hydrological cycles and governance clauses with the specific expression of a man who was not sure what he was witnessing but knew, with absolute certainty, that it was something he had been waiting a long time to see. His name was Aldrich Vale. He was 33 years old, and he had been the Alpha King of the 5 northern packs for 6 years. He had been a widower for 3 of those years, His mate Sela had died of a fast-moving pathology in the winter of his 4th year as king, leaving him with 2-year-old twins and a grief that he had managed with the specific thoroughness of a man who understood that grief could not be indefinitely postponed but could be scheduled. He had scheduled it carefully. He had grieved Sela in the private hours, the small hours of early morning, the brief window between the end of the day's last obligation and the beginning of sleep, the specific internal time that had no external witness and no governance requirement. He had done his grieving there, thoroughly and without shortcut, with the same methodical care he applied to everything that mattered. And in the public hours he had led his pack. He had raised his sons. The boys were everything. He knew this about himself. He knew it with the clarity of a man who had taken inventory of what he was and what he was made of after the loss, and found that at the center of it, after everything else was accounted for, were Kale and Dran. The abilities had emerged gradually, over the year following Sela's death. He had not been frightened by them. He wanted to be honest about this, because the council had assumed he shared their alarm, and he had not corrected that assumption because managing the council's alarm was easier when they believed he was a concerned co-manager of the problem rather than someone who was going to defend his sons against their concern with the full weight of alpha authority. He was not alarmed by his sons. He was awed by them. He was also, if he was being completely honest with himself, frightened on their behalf. Not of them, for them. For the boys who knew too much and said too much and had already driven away 7 people who were supposed to care for them, and who were 4 years old and did not yet understand why the truth was something people ran from. He had been trying to explain this to them. It was difficult to explain to a 4-year-old that the thing they were doing naturally was something the world would punish them for. He had tried 3 different framings, none of which had produced what he was hoping for. Kel had listened to the first attempt and said, very simply, "We know people are uncomfortable. We just can't make ourselves not see it." Dran had added, "It would be like not seeing color. We could try, but we would still see it." He had not tried a 4th framing. He had been trying to find someone who would not need the explanation. Someone who could be with the boys and be seen by them without the seeing requiring management. 7 women had tried. And then, on a Tuesday in October, he had walked into the schoolroom and found an Omega in a plain gray dress talking about water rights with his sons, and both his sons were leaning slightly toward her the way they never leaned toward anyone, and something he could not yet name was telling him that this was different. The council became a problem in week 3. She had expected it. The placement description had contained enough between its careful lines for her to understand that the boys were a political issue as well as a personal one, and that there were council members who viewed the twins' abilities as something to be managed or contained rather than supported. The specific council member who came to observe was a wolf named Wendell Cress, the same Wendell whose rules had restricted the boys from the library. A man in his 50s with the specific quality of someone who had organized his understanding of the world around a set of assumptions and was committed to those assumptions with the fervor of a person who understood, somewhere underneath, that the assumptions were fragile. He arrived during afternoon lessons. She had been prepared for him. She had, in the 3 weeks since her arrival, developed a fairly complete picture of Wendell Cress through the specific method she used to develop pictures of things, reading everything available, observing, asking the boys careful questions, and listening to what wasn't said. What she had found was that Wendell's concern about the boys was genuine. He was not a villain. He was a man who was frightened of things he did not understand, who had watched the boys say accurate things about private matters one too many times, and had concluded that this was dangerous, not to the boys, but to the stability of governance. A council that could be read by 2 children was a council that could be exposed by 2 children. He was protecting secrets. Not terrible secrets, as far as she could tell. The governance had its compromises, the same as any governance, but nothing that crossed into genuine harm. More the secrets of people who had been doing their work imperfectly and didn't want the imperfection reviewed. She understood this. She had also made a decision about it. Wendell arrived, and she gave him a chair, and he observed. The lesson that day was history. Specifically, the history of the Northern Territories formation, the old wars, the treaties, the messy and complicated and ultimately functional process by which 5 packs had become a governance under a single alpha king. Cale and Dran loved this lesson, not because of the battles, which neither of them had much interest in, because of the treaty negotiations. The specific human texture of people trying to find agreements that all parties could live with, the back and forth of it, the places where the historical record showed people being genuinely creative about what was possible. Wendell listened. He watched the boys. He watched Wren. At the end of the lesson, when Dran had summarized the Third Eastern Treaty's key innovation with an accuracy that should not have been possible for a 4-year-old, Wendell's face had gone through several things. Wren looked at him. "They're not dangerous," she said, before he could form the official version of whatever he had come to say. "What they do is notice things accurately and say them. That isn't dangerous unless the things being said are things that someone wants to keep hidden." Wendell went very still. "That's rather direct," he said. "Yes," she said. "I find it saves time." A pause. "The council's concern," he started, "is that 2 children who say true things are going to say true things about the council," she said. "Yes, I understand the concern. I would suggest that the solution to that concern is not restricting the children, but reviewing the things that would be problematic if said." The stillness in the room was the specific stillness of something that was exactly true landing in a space where exact truth was not the usual currency. Both boys were very quiet, watching. Wendell looked at Wren for a long moment. "You are an Omega from Crestfall," he said. "Yes." "You were rejected by your bond." "Yes." "The council did not approve your placement." "The council placed me," she said. "Or rather, the council's support staff used the council's authority to extend the offer. The council itself was not convened for the decision, which is procedurally standard for household staff placements below a certain seniority level." A pause. "I read the governance documents." Wendell was completely still. "Which governance documents?" he asked slowly. "The household staffing protocols. The council procedure manual. The placement authority delegation records." She held his gaze. "And the 3rd quarter governance report. The eastern boundary section." Cale had a question about Clause 7. He was right about the problem with it. Very slowly, Wendell looked at Cale. Cale looked back at him with the dark, old eyes. "She's not frightened of us," Cale said. "I can see that," Wendell said. "She's not frightened of you either," Dran said, from his end of the table. Wendell was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, after a pause. "I can see that too." He left without saying the thing he had come to say. He did not come back. The 3rd week was also when the nightmares started. Not the boys' nightmares. They slept well, with the specific solid sleep of children who had found a way to discharge their day's experiences through the conversations they had with each other after lights out. A private communication she could hear as a faint murmur through the wall, in which she had decided, very deliberately, not to investigate. The nightmares were hers. Not about the rejection, specifically. She had processed the rejection with the focused attention she gave to difficult things, had looked at it directly, and turned it over, and found all its edges, and understood its shape, and the grief of it was real and present, but it was grief, not trauma. Grief had a texture she recognized. She knew how to carry it. The nightmares were about the bond, not the broken one, the one she could still feel the outline of, the negative space where something had been, the cold outside the door. The nightmares were about sitting at the edge of that space and knowing, with the specific certainty of dreams, that there was something on the other side. She woke from them in the dark and lay very still in her room in the keep and listened to the building's nighttime sounds. The settling of the old stone. The distant night guards on the exterior walls. The very faint murmur from the boys' room that meant they were having their after lights out conversation. She knew, with the part of her that was trying to be honest with itself, what the nightmares were about. She was not going to let herself think about it directly yet. She had work to do. The work, in the 5th week, revealed something new about the boys that the placement reports had not mentioned, probably because none of the previous 7 nannies had stayed long enough to see it. The boys were teaching themselves things. Not through any resource she had given them. Not through the library access. Not through the lessons. Not through the conversations. Through something she didn't have a name for until Cale, in the 6th week, demonstrated it for her so directly that there was no ambiguity about what she was seeing. He had been looking out the east window for approximately 20 minutes during a lesson. Not the absent gaze of a bored child. The specific focused distance of someone who was receiving information. Cale, she had said. He had turned to her. The Eastern delegation arrived this morning, he said. The one from the Thornwall Collective. There are 7 of them. The senior member is anxious because his primary agenda item was superseded by the water rights discussion, and he doesn't know if he'll get time today. A pause. His name is Aldrich, not Father. Different Aldrich. He has a scar on his left hand from a training accident when he was 12. She had looked at this boy. How do you know that? She asked. The same way I know everything, he said, very simply. I receive it. From where? He had looked at her with the patient expression of someone who had been asked this question before and had given up trying to explain it in terms that had any available framework. From the world, he said. It's always talking. Most wolves don't hear it. We hear it. Dran, from his seat, had nodded. She had sat with this for a moment. Can you choose not to hear it? She asked. We can be louder than it, Cale said. When we're talking about something we're interested in, it's like the other information is farther away. The lesson is closer. But we don't turn it off. Have you tried explaining this to your father? He understands the part he can see, Dran said. He doesn't fully understand where it comes from. Does it matter? She asked. They both looked at her. What do you mean? Cale said. Does it matter where it comes from? She said. It's how you work. Whether it comes from the world or from somewhere else in you or from something the wolf biology texts haven't documented yet, it's you. And the question isn't where it comes from. The question is what you do with it. Another very long look between them. She doesn't need it to be explained, Cale said to his brother. No, Dran said. She just needs it to be true. Yes, she said. That's it exactly. The 3rd week was also when the nightmare started. The work, in week 4, became unexpectedly complicated. But before the complication, there were weeks that were simply good. She had not had simple good weeks in a long time. The last year had been the rejection and the reconstruction and the journey to the keep, and before that had been the specific difficulty of being an omega in a pack that was kind about it, and had been kind about it for so long that the kindness had become a shape she lived inside, without noticing its limits. These weeks were different. The boys were extraordinary every day. Cale reading governance documents and identifying problems that the full council apparatus had missed. Dran drawing the Eastern Territories from memory with a precision that a trained cartographer would have been proud of. Both of them taking the information she brought to the schoolroom, the treaties, the historical documents, the governance structure, the ecology of the territories, everything she had been reading in the library evenings, and doing things with it that she had not predicted. They were not simply absorbing. They were synthesizing, making connections between things that she found herself noticing after the fact, a treaty provision and a geographical feature and a historical event that had happened 200 years ago, drawn together by Dran in a single sentence that stopped her mid-question. She would pause. She would think about what he had said. She would realize he was right. You knew that already, he said one afternoon, watching her face. I knew the parts separately, she said. I hadn't put them together that way. You would have, he said. You put things together. We just go faster. She had looked at this 4-year-old boy. I know, she said. I'm learning to keep up. He had smiled. The specific Dran smile, smaller and more private than Cale's, appearing less often and meaning more when it appeared. She had decided, in that moment, that whatever else the keep brought, She was going to defend these children's right to be exactly as large as they were. The complication arrived in week 4. She was in the garden with both boys on a Thursday afternoon when Cale stopped mid-sentence during a discussion of the old pack formation treaties and looked toward the keep's north entrance with the specific quality of attention he used when he was receiving information that wasn't available through normal sensory channels. "Father is coming," he said. "He usually comes in the evenings," Drance said. Something changed. Wren looked toward the north entrance. She could hear footsteps on the stone path. Fast ones, the footsteps of someone moving with purpose rather than strolling. And underneath the sound, something else. Something she registered through the bond's negative space, the place where the rejection had left a sensitivity that was different from the bond itself. Whatever it was reading in Aldrich Vale's approach was not fine. He came through the garden gate with the controlled urgency of a man who had been calm in a difficult situation for longer than was sustainable and had just reached the end of sustainable. His eyes found her first. Not the boys. Her. She understood, in the specific understanding that had been building for 3 weeks of him sitting in on lessons and coming to the garden and asking her questions about the boys and asking the boys questions about their days and lingering past the point where lingering had an obvious purpose. She understood that this was not unusual, that he had been finding her first for a while. She filed that. "I need 5 minutes," he said. "Boys," she said. "The gardener needs help with the east bed today. The autumn bulbs." Both boys looked at her, then at their father, then at each other. "5 minutes," Cale said, which could have been a repetition of what Aldrich had said or could have been something else entirely. They went to find the gardener. Aldrich looked at them go. Then he looked at her. "The council voted this morning," he said. "On the boys." She went still. "What vote?" "A formal resolution on their educational isolation." His voice was even in the way of voices that were being kept even with significant effort. Wendell put forward a motion that their schooling be moved to a restricted facility outside the main keep. Limited interaction with pack governance. Supervised reading materials. She looked at him. "He wants to separate them from the governance infrastructure," she said. "Remove them from the information environment they're currently learning from." "Yes. Because they know things. Because they know things." She thought about Cale reading the governance document. About Dran's map of the Eastern Territories. About both boys sitting across from her for 3 weeks and being the most genuinely curious and intellectually alive people she had encountered since she started this work. "What did you say?" she asked. "I said no," he said. Clearly and completely, and with the specific language that makes it impossible for the council to revisit without escalating to a formal challenge of alpha authority. A pause. But the vote was 8-3. They have the numbers for a formal challenge if they choose to pursue it. "Will they?" "Wendell won't," he said. "I think our conversation this week." He stopped. "What did you say to him?" "I told him the solution to not wanting children to say true things was not to restrict the children, but to review the things that would be problematic if said." Aldrich looked at her. Something moved through his face that she was learning to read. The specific expression that appeared when she said something that reached past the Alpha King and found the person underneath. "That is exactly right," he said. "It didn't end the concern," she said. "Just redirected it. If the other council members are less honest with themselves than Wendell." "They are," he said. "Then we have a timeline problem." He nodded. She thought for a moment. "Can I see the governance documents from the original pack formation?" she asked. "The founding council charters. Not the summaries, the primary documents." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because I think the council's motion may have a procedural problem," she said. "The founding charters contain specific provisions about alpha line heirs and their right to education without governance interference. If those provisions are still operative." "They're still operative," he said slowly. "Then the vote was procedurally invalid," she said. "The council can hold all the votes they want. They can't enforce this one without the Alpha's explicit agreement, and you can't give that agreement because the founding charter prohibits it." He stared at her. "You've read the founding charters," he said. "I read what I can find," she said. "The library here is excellent. The founding charters are in the restricted section." She paused. "The secondary restricted section," she said carefully, "which requires a household staff level 4 clearance to access, which I was granted in my first week as a precondition of my access to the educational resource materials for the boys." A pause. "I may have read somewhat beyond the educational resource materials." Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. Something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one crossed his face. "Somewhat," he said. "Somewhat," she agreed. "Show me the provision," he said. She showed him. The council's motion was formally invalidated 3 days later. Not dramatically. Aldrich was not a man who did things dramatically when they could be done correctly. He presented the founding charter provision to the council in the specific, quiet way of someone laying down evidence that speaks entirely for itself, and he allowed the members to read it, and he asked Wendell what the provision said, and Wendell read it aloud. The motion was withdrawn, not happily, but correctly. After the council meeting, Aldrich found her in the schoolroom. She was reading to both boys, one of the old pack histories, the real one, not the ceremonial version, the complicated and messy and occasionally morally difficult version that Cale had found on the third shelf and which both boys considered significantly more interesting than the approved curriculum. He stood in the doorway. She finished the paragraph. "The charter provision," he said. "Yes. You found it in one evening." "2 evenings," she said. "The founding charter is long. The council's legal team has reviewed those documents quarterly for 10 years. They were reviewing them for the specific things they expected to need," she said. "I was reading them for interest." He looked at her. She looked back. Both boys were doing the thing they did sometimes, going completely still and quiet, and looking between two adults with the specific quality of attention they used for things they considered significant. She was aware of this. She suspected Aldrich was aware of it too. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Tell me. What you did for the boys, not just the charter. All of it. The 3 weeks. The way you," he stopped. "They have not been, since their mother died." He stopped again. She waited. She had learned to wait for him in the specific way she waited for the boys. Not the impatient waiting of someone who wanted him to finish faster, but the patient waiting of someone who understood that the thing being said required the right words, and the right words sometimes needed time to arrive. "They have not been genuinely comfortable with anyone," he said. "I have watched them make every person who came into this house uncomfortable, not because they were trying to, but because they couldn't stop being what they are. And then you came, and they were just," he spread one hand, the gesture of a man searching for a word, "themselves. Without management." For the first time, she looked at her hands. "They're extraordinary," she said. "They shouldn't have to manage themselves." "No," he said. "They shouldn't." A pause. "What you are," he said carefully. "The way you move through this place. The things you see and the things you don't make a performance out of seeing. The way you," he stopped a third time. She looked up at him. "The bond was broken," she said. "Not defensively. Just factually, providing the information that was relevant. I know what you're. I want to be honest about what I am and what I'm not right now. The rejection was 11 months ago, and the bond space is it's still there. I don't know what that means for what you're." "I'm not asking about the bond," he said. She stopped. "I'm asking about you," he said. "The person, not the bond mechanics, not the wolf biological documentation. You." She looked at him. The library was quiet. The lamp oil smell. The old documents in their shelves. The faint sound of the boys' murmur through the keep's walls. They had gone to bed an hour ago, and were in their post-lights-out conversation, the one she did not investigate. "What do you want to know about me?" she asked. "I want to know what you want," he said. "Not the official answer, not what you think is appropriate to want given your position here, not what you think I want to hear. What you actually want." She was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the question. She had not been asked what she wanted in a very long time. The rejection had contained a version of it, You are not what I want. But that was not the same. She had not been asked by someone who was genuinely interested in the answer. I want to stay, she said. Not because the position is good, though it is. Not because the coin is reliable, though it is. Because the boys are, she stopped. Because this is the first place I have been that seems to require the full version of me rather than a carefully managed smaller one. A pause. And because. She stopped. He waited, with the same patience she had been noticing for months. Because the library is excellent, she finished. He looked at her. Then he did the thing that surprised her, the specific laugh she had been cataloging, the one that was entirely genuine and appeared without announcement. Low and real, nothing performed about it. The library, he said. It is genuinely excellent, she said. He reached out across the table and placed his hand over hers. Just that. The lightest possible thing. The acknowledgement that was not yet what it was going to become. She did not move her hand. She felt the bond, the one that had been rebuilding in the space where the broken one had been, patient and incremental and entirely unbothered by the fact that it was doing something the wolf biology text said wasn't supposed to happen. She felt it step forward. Not arrived. Not yet. But coming. She was not frightened of it. Both boys, she thought, would say of course you're not. She looked at her hand under his. I want to tell you something, she said. Tell me. The broken bond, she said. It doesn't stay broken the way the texts describe. The space where it was, it's still there. But it's been. She searched for the word. Building. Toward something. I don't know the correct terminology for this. The old texts have a reference to it, but it's in the secondary restricted section, and even I haven't gotten through all of it. He was very still. Building toward what, he asked. I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I know the direction it's building toward. He held her gaze. When you know, he said carefully, will you tell me? When I know, she said, you will probably already know. He looked at her. Because of the boys? Because of you, she said. You pay attention. He was quiet. His hand was still over hers. Yes, he said. I do. The formal bond rebuilt in the 7th month. It was not the dramatic, all-at-once recognition of two wolves discovering in a single moment that the moon goddess had made them for each other. It was slower than that. More real, in some ways. It was the accumulation of months of mornings in the schoolroom and evenings in the garden and nights, when he came to the library, where she was reading after the boys were asleep, and sat down across from her, without any particular agenda, and they talked. About the governance, which she had been reading and which she had opinions about that he found consistently interesting in the specific way of someone who was used to opinions shaped by political interest and kept encountering opinions shaped by nothing but clear analysis. About the boys and the specific daily extraordinary of them, the things they had said and noticed and synthesized that day. He had not, she realized, had anyone to tell these things to. The council was not a safe audience for stories about the boys' abilities. Those stories fed the concern rather than the understanding. The household staff were careful and kind, but maintained the distance of the professional relationship. She was not maintaining distance. She had started as his son's caregiver and had become, without a formal transition point, the person he came to the library to talk to. About his mate's death. He told her about Cello one evening. Not the official version, not the summary that contained the facts in their correct order, but the texture of it. The specific things he missed. The particular quality of her laugh, which had been completely different from what he had expected when he first heard it. The way she had managed the boys even at 2 years old with a patience that seemed to refill rather than deplete. The winter she died and the specific impossibility of that winter and how he had gotten through it by putting one obligation in front of the next and not looking at the whole of it at once. She listened the way she listened to everything. Fully, with the particular quality of attention that meant she was not managing the conversation, but receiving it. She told him about Corvin. The whole version, not the compact one. About the packed square, and the formal words, and the door in the cold, and the window. About staying 3 weeks after because leaving immediately would have been fleeing, and she was not fleeing. About arriving at the keep with one bag and no plan beyond the work. You weren't frightened, he said. Not a question. I was very frightened, she said. But the fear wasn't of them. It was the fear of walking into a place that was going to see what I was. And then, she stopped. And then, he asked. And then Cale said, "You're not scared?" And I said no, and he said, "That's different." And it was the first time in 11 months that something was different in the right direction. He was quiet. "They chose you," he said. "They let me in," she said. "That's a different thing." "Is it?" She thought about it. "They let me in because I didn't require them to be smaller," she said. "That's not choosing. That's just being seen clearly." "In my experience," he said, "being seen clearly is the same as being chosen. Most people can't do it." She held his gaze across the library table. The evenings were building into something she was aware of and not quite looking at directly yet, in the way she had learned to allow things to develop at the pace they needed rather than at the pace her anxiety would have preferred. He was not rushing it. She had been noticing that. The patience of it. The specific way he gave things the time they needed without the performance of patience that was actually management of impatience. The bond was rebuilding in the space where the broken one had been. She felt it happening. She was trying to decide whether to tell him when he told her first. Yes. What did it clarify? She thought about it. That I had been small, she said. Not because anyone made me small. Because I had decided that was the appropriate size for where I was. And the rejection removed the reason I had for staying at that size. And without the reason, she paused. I got to find out what size I actually was. He was very quiet. What size is that? He asked. She looked at him. I don't entirely know yet, she said. I'm still finding out. He looked at her. I know some of it, he said. She held his gaze. What do you know? I know you found a founding charter provision in 2 evenings that a legal team missed for 10 years, he said. I know you walked into a room with 2 children who had driven away 7 experienced wolves and were comfortable within 5 minutes. I know you told my head advisor, in your first month, that the solution to secrets is not to restrict the people who can sense them. I know. He stopped. Started again. I know that my sons, who have never been comfortable with anyone since their mother died, follow you around the keep like you are the thing they have been oriented toward their entire short lives. She looked at her hands. They're extraordinary children, she said. Yes, he said. And they chose you. They have never chosen anyone. She was quiet. I'm an Omega from Crestfall with a broken bond and 1 bag, she said. I know what you are, he said. I am telling you what I see. She looked up. What do you see? He looked at her for a long moment with the dark eyes that had their own quality of depth, their own version of the thing she saw in the boys. Someone who is exactly the right size, he said. For this place. For these children. For he stopped. I am trying to say this without making it something you feel you need to manage. She felt something move in the space where the bond had been. Not the bond, but something in the same neighborhood. The door that had been slammed in the packed square. The one she had been standing outside of in the cold, looking at the warmth through the window. It opened. Just slightly. Just enough to let in heat. I don't manage things, she said. I stay present. There's a difference. Yes, he said. There is. He reached out across the library table and placed his hand over hers. Just that. The lightest possible thing. The acknowledgement that was not yet what it was going to become. She did not move her hand. The bond rebuilt slowly. This was not the standard account. The standard account, the pack histories, the formal wolf biology texts she had read in the library, described rejected bonds as either permanently severed or instantly reconstituted in extraordinary circumstances. Hers did neither. It rebuilt the way her trust had rebuilt. The way her sense of her own size had rebuilt. Incrementally, with the specific patient momentum of something that knew where it was going and was not in a rush about it. Aldrich did not rush it. She noticed this. She noticed that he was a man who understood the difference between patience and restraint. Patience being the willing acceptance of a pace that was right, restraint being the forced management of a pace that was wrong. He was patient with his sons, with the council, with her. She found this extraordinary. She found him extraordinary. In the specific way she found things extraordinary, not with the drama of sudden revelation, but with the accumulation of evidence. Each conversation, each evening in the library, each morning in the schoolroom where he showed up at the door and stood there with the quiet presence of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. The boys knew, of course. They had known before she did, probably. Cale had told her, on a morning in the 3rd month, with the specific flat certainty of someone stating an established fact. He loves you. She had been straightening the schoolroom shelves. We'll see, she said. We already see, Dran said. I appreciate the advance information, she said. I'll let the situation develop at its own pace. Both boys had looked at each other. She is very calm about this, Cale said. Yes, Dran agreed. It's one of the good things about her. She had bitten back a smile and gone back to the shelves. She had not gone back to Crestfall. Not because she was avoiding it, not because the rejection had made the place impossible. She was not someone who arranged her geography around avoidance. She had not gone back because there was nothing to go back to that required her presence yet. She wrote to her mother. Her mother's letters in return were full of the ordinary information of a life being lived in a small western pack. But in the 4th month, there was a paragraph that she read 3 times. Mrs. Headwell tells me you are working for the Alpha King's household, that you are with his children. I didn't know what to say to her, so I just nodded. But I want you to know that I am not surprised. I have been watching you be the person the wrong place couldn't hold for 22 years. I am glad you have found the right one. She folded that letter and kept it with the other one she had been keeping. The formal bond rebuilt in the 7th month. Not in a dramatic location. Not in the forest. Not in a moonlit garden. Not in any of the cinematic settings that the pack stories always used. In the library. At 11 in the evening, with a governance document about the Eastern Boundary Clause 7 spread on the table between them. A document they had been discussing for 40 minutes in the specific way they discussed governance, which was as equals, with disagreement where disagreement was warranted and agreement where it was earned. He had made a point she could not counter. She had said, "You're right about that." He had looked at her with the expression that appeared when something she did reached past the Alpha King. And the bond, the one that had been building in the space where the broken one had been, patient and incremental and entirely unbothered by the fact that it was doing something the wolf biology text said wasn't supposed to happen, had arrived. Not snapped, not crashed, settled. Like the hydrological cycle she had taught the boys in week 1. Water finding its level. Not dramatic. Just exactly where it was supposed to be. She felt it. He felt it. Both of them went very still. There it is, he said quietly. There it is, she agreed. Cale and Dran attended the bonding ceremony in their good clothes. Dran had a significant opinion about his collar, which he expressed clearly and was accommodated. Cale stood very straight during the formal proceedings with the specific gravity of someone who understood the significance of what was happening. After, in the garden, Wren sat on the stone bench, the same one she had first seen them on, the one where they had been sitting in their ancient, patient stillness, waiting for something. Cale sat beside her. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "We knew you were coming." She looked at him. How? He considered this. It was like when you know a word before you read it, he said. You know the shape of it. You don't know the specific letters until you see them. But when you see them, you recognize it. She thought about that. And what was the shape? She asked. Someone who stayed, he said. Someone who could see us and didn't need us to be smaller. She looked at this boy who was 4.5 years old and had just described, with perfect accuracy, the thing she had been waiting to find out about herself. I didn't need you to be smaller, she said. I needed you exactly as you are. Yes, Cale said. That's what we knew was coming. Dran appeared from around the garden path, found his brother on the bench, and sat on Wren's other side. He took her hand with the specific matter-of-fact ease of a child who had decided this was allowed. She let him. The three of them sat in the garden in the afternoon light. The bond was new and warm and present in the way of things that had arrived at the right time and knew it. The twins were exactly as they had always been, ancient-eyed, knowing, perfectly comfortable in the world they occupied. She was exactly what she had found out she was. The right size. For this place. For these children. For this life. There is something Aldrich told her, later, much later, in one of the long evenings that had become the best part of both their lives. I have been trying to understand what it is that you do with them. Kale and Dran. Why they're different with you. She had thought about it. I don't try to make them smaller, she said. That's the whole thing. Every person who came before me, not because they were bad people, but they were frightened of the boys being exactly as large as they were. They kept trying to find ways to make them fit a safer size. She paused, and the boys could feel that. They're sensitive to it. And the more someone tried to make them smaller, the more they said the true things that made people run. And you weren't frightened. I had already learned that being made smaller was not the same as being safe, she said. The rejection taught me that. You can make yourself as small as you want, and it doesn't protect you from the thing that's going to happen. It just means you're small when it does. He was quiet. So you stayed full-sized, he said. I stayed full-sized, she said. And they recognized it. Because they have been full-sized their whole lives, and they needed someone who wouldn't flinch at that. He looked at her. You are going to be a remarkable Luna, he said. I'm working on it, she said. You already are it, he said. The working on it is just the proof. There is something the very old wolf traditions say about the rejected bond. Most of the modern texts gloss over it, because the modern texts were written in an era that preferred clean narratives. But the old texts, the ones she had read in the restricted library section in the evenings after the boys were asleep, were more honest. The old text said, a rejected bond does not end. It transforms. What was one kind of opening becomes another. The door that was closed from the inside becomes a door that only opens outward. She had read that in the 4th month. She had thought about the cold outside the door, about looking at the warmth through the window. She understood it differently now. The door that only opens outward was not a lesser door. It was not the diminished version of what the bond was supposed to be. It was a door that you opened yourself. That required you to decide. That didn't just happen to you from both sides simultaneously, but that you walked through with your eyes open, knowing the size of what you were choosing. The rejection had not taken something from her. It had, in the end, given her a different kind of door. She had stood outside it for a while, and then she had walked through. If you stayed with Wren all the way through this story, from the Pack Square in Crestfall to the garden bench with 2 extraordinary boys on either side of her, then you already know something important. She was not saved by the bond. She was not rescued by the Alpha King. She was not made relevant by being chosen. She was already all of those things before any of it happened. The rejection clarified her. And the children who could see through every performance in every room looked at her and said, there, that one, the one who doesn't need us to be smaller. You have been someone like that, maybe. Someone who has been made small by a thing that wasn't supposed to make you small. Someone sitting outside a door in the cold, looking at the warmth through the window. The door opens outward. You are the one who opens it. This channel is here every week for everyone who is finding out what size they actually are. For the rejected and the overlooked and the ones the report said wouldn't last. For the people who stay when everyone else leaves. Subscribe. Hit that bell. Drop your location in the comments, because I need to know where in the world someone needed Wren's story today. And come back next week. Because the next story starts with someone sitting outside a door. And by the end of it, they walk through. That person might be you.